With the successful ratification of the transit agreement, we look forward to a new era of interstellar cooperation.
She was unconscious before she finished the insult, which meant she never got to hear how it ended. And Tamaz Reyes spent the next 6 hours wondering if that was mercy or just bad timing. The insult had been building for about 20 minutes. That was how long Ambassador Dranathi Voss of the Shenalari Diplomatic Continuance had been standing in the Marath Hub Transit Lounge, waiting for her connecting vessel, expressing her views on the state of Terran integration into conclave society to the 3 aides traveling with her, and doing so at a volume she clearly did not consider inappropriate in a shared public space. Tamaz had been sitting 4 seats down with a cup of cooling coffee and a maintenance report he was trying to finish before the end of his shift. And he had been, with the professional discipline of a man who had worked 11 years in transit facility management, not listening. He was good at not listening. It was a skill you developed when the job put you in rooms with important beings having important conversations that were not your conversations. You learned to create a kind of interior distance from the ambient sound of the world, to let it wash past while you focused on the thing in front of you. In this case, a maintenance report about a ventilation irregularity in Corridor 7 that he had been trying to finish for 3 days. What broke through the interior distance was not the content of what she was saying. It was the particular register of the saying, that specific quality of voice that meant someone believed with complete confidence that they were among people who agreed with them. The fundamental problem with Terran integration, Ambassador Voss was saying, in Shenalari formal speech that the lounge's ambient translation rendered with crisp neutrality, is that you cannot accelerate the evolution of a species through policy. The Terrans are what they are. Industrious, certainly, persistent, occasionally useful in the way that a well-trained animal is useful, but the cognitive architecture simply does not. And then she stopped speaking and fell. Not gradually, not with warnings. She was mid-sentence, and then she was not, and then she was on the floor of the transit lounge with her 3 aides making the Shenalari sound that the ambient translation rendered as crisis alert, and Tamaz Reyes was already moving before he had made a conscious decision to move. The maintenance report sliding off his knee and onto the seat. The coffee left behind, 11 years of transit facility management producing, from some depth he hadn't known it reached. The specific muscle memory of a man who had been first aid certified every year for 11 years, and had spent most of those years hoping he would never need it. He had needed it twice before. A Keth contractor with a cardiac event in Corridor 3 6 years ago, a human tourist with an allergic reaction 2 years after that. Both times the muscle memory had been there before the thinking was. It was there now. He was on his knees beside Ambassador Voss before her aides had finished their crisis alert sound, his hands already moving to the assessment positions, checking airway, checking the quality of her breathing, checking the color of her secondary skin layer, which was, in Shenalari physiology, the first indicator of circulatory distress. The secondary skin layer was wrong, not a little wrong, significantly wrong. "Call medical," he said to the nearest aide. His voice came out flat and precise, which was how his voice worked in these moments. All the other registers fell away and what was left was just the information. "Tell them Shenalari female, adult, loss of consciousness, secondary skin presentation indicating circulatory event. Tell them I need a crash cart with Shenalari cardiac protocol." The aide stared at him. "Now," Tamaz said. The aide moved. The transit lounge of Marath Hub was not a medical facility. This was a fact Tamaz was acutely aware of for the next 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which was how long it took the medical team to arrive, and which was the longest 4 minutes and 30 seconds he had experienced in recent memory. He knew what he could do and he knew what he couldn't do, and he stayed entirely within the first category. He maintained the airway. He monitored the breathing rate. He tracked the secondary skin presentation and called updates to the aide who was relaying them to the incoming medical team via comm. He did not attempt anything that required medical training he did not have, because one of the first things they had taught him in first aid certification 11 years ago was that the most dangerous thing an untrained person could do was the thing they weren't trained to do. He talked to her. This was not in the first aid protocol, or it was in the sense that the protocol said maintain verbal contact where possible to monitor consciousness, and what that meant in practice was that Tom Ayacute's Reyes knelt on the floor of the transit lounge talking to an unconscious Shenalari diplomat who had just been comparing him to a well-trained animal. And he talked to her the way he talked to the ventilation systems when they were giving him trouble, steadily, without drama. As if the situation were routine and would resolve correctly if everyone did their job. Okay, he said, medical is on the way, you're going to be fine, just stay with me. Oh, she was not conscious, she could not hear him, he knew this. Oh, he said it anyway. The aides had formed a cluster nearby in the Shenalari configuration that body language specialists described as defensive regrouping, a kind of mutual reinforcement in crisis, each one slightly turned toward the others in a way that made them collectively more stable. They watched him with an attention that he registered and set aside for later processing. Is she? What is her status? The nearest aide asked. A young Shenalari in diplomatic gray, whose name Tamaz would learn later was Preth. The question had a quality of controlled fear in it that the translation system mostly kept out and Tamaz mostly heard anyway. Breathing is stable, he said. Circulation I can't assess fully without equipment. She needs the medical team. He looked up briefly. She's going to be okay. Talk to me. Does she have any history of cardiac events? Any medications I should tell the medics about? Preth blinked. You are asking for her medical history. The medics will need it. Do you have access to it? A pause. Then Preth was moving, pulling out a data device, finding something in it with shaking hands that found what they were looking for anyway. I have her travel health documentation, Preth said. Read me anything relevant, anything about her cardiovascular system. Preth read, Tamaz listened and filed and kept his hands where they were, and kept talking to the woman on the floor in the steady, routine voice. The medical team arrived at 4 minutes 30 seconds. They were efficient. They assessed, they worked, they deployed the equipment, they communicated in the fast-clipped shorthand of people who had trained for this. The lead medic, a Shenalari herself, which Tamaz noted with some relief given the cardiac protocol complexity, glanced at him once with an expression he couldn't read and then focused entirely on the patient. Tamaz moved back, out of the way. His hands were shaking slightly, he noticed. They always did afterward. He sat on the edge of a nearby seat and looked at his hands and waited for them to stop. Preth came to stand beside him. You were trained for this, Preth said. It was not quite a question. First aid certification, Tamaz said. Annual, it's required for transit facility management. Preth looked at him. You assessed her secondary skin presentation. That is, a pause. The secondary skin is a Shenalari physiological indicator. It is not part of standard conclave first aid protocols for non-Shenalari practitioners. It's in the certification curriculum if you take the cross-species module, Tamaz said. I take it every year. He looked at the medical team working. It adds 2 days to the recertification, but the hub gets ships from about 60 member species. Seemed worth knowing. Preth was quiet for a moment. You take the additional training, Preth said, every year for a transit management position. In case I'm sitting in a lounge and someone needs help, Tamaz said. Yeah. He looked at his hands, they had stopped shaking. The medical team stabilized Ambassador Voss in the transit lounge and moved her to the hub's medical bay. Tamaz gave a full witness and first responder account to the medical authority and then went back to the lounge to find his coffee and his maintenance report, both of which had been moved and were sitting on a different seat. placed there with the careful deliberateness of someone who had wanted to do something and hadn't known what else to do. He looked at the maintenance report. Then he looked at the spot on the floor where she had been. The lounge had resumed its ordinary function around the event, the way transit spaces did, not callously, just practically, because ships did not stop and platforms did not hold, and the movement of the hub was too large to pause for any particular moment within it. He picked up the coffee. It was cold. He drank it anyway because it had been a long day before the last 20 minutes and it was going to be a longer one after. Preth found him 20 minutes later. The aide looked different from the controlled fear version Tamaz had seen in the lounge, not calmer exactly, but more organized, as if the fear had been sorted into its correct file and what remained was something else. The young Shenalari stood in front of him with the precise formal posture of someone delivering an official message, and then slightly visibly adjusted into something less formal. "Oh, she is stable," Preth said. "The medical team says she is expected to recover fully." They identified the event as a Shenalari cardiac arrhythmia specific to our physiology, treatable especially when caught early. "Good," Tamaz said. The lead medic told us that the interventions in the first 5 minutes were, Preth seemed to be looking for the right rendering, critical to the outcome. She said the secondary skin assessment was particularly, she said it confirmed the cardiac hypothesis before the equipment arrived and meant the correct protocol was deployed immediately rather than after diagnostic delay. Another pause. She was specific about that. Tamaz nodded. He was looking at the maintenance report but not reading it. She said if a standard non-species specific protocol had been used, Preth continued, the diagnostic delay might have been long enough to, the outcome might have been different. But it wasn't, Tamaz said. No, Preth agreed, because of the training you take every year, the additional 2 days. Preth was quiet for a moment. May I ask why? Tamaz looked up. I thought I answered that. You said it seemed worth knowing. Preth met his eyes. I am asking what made it seem worth knowing to you. Tamaz thought about it, the honest answer, not the convenient one. People come through here from everywhere, he said. Every species, every background. They're in transit, which means they're between places, not home, not where they're going. If something goes wrong in that space, in my facility, I'm often the first person there. He looked at the maintenance report, the Corridor 7 ventilation irregularity he had been trying to finish before. I want to know what I'm looking at when I get there, for whoever's there. For whoever's there, Preth repeated. Oh yeah. Including Shenalari diplomats who have been speaking unkindly about your species. Tamaz looked at him. The aide's expression was careful, monitoring something. I didn't catch all of it, Tamaz said, which was true as far as it went. Preth was quiet, then with a precision that had something painful in it. I heard all of what was said. I have been her aide for 3 years and I am familiar with her views on certain species. Okay, Tamaz said. And I said to you. She needed help, Tamaz said. That's the whole thing, that's the complete list of relevant information. Preth looked at him for a long moment. The Shenalari emotional register was subtle by species standards, less visible than human expression, more layered in the secondary cues, but Tamaz had been around enough Shenalari in 11 years that he could usually find the signal in the subtlety. What he found in Preth's face at that moment was something that might, in the correct framing, be called complicated. I should return to the medical bay, Preth said. Give her my best, Tamaz said, and meant it simply, and watched the aide process the simplicity of it for a moment before nodding and going. He finished the maintenance report. This was important to him in a way that he didn't bother to examine. The Corridor 7 ventilation irregularity was a real problem that would become a larger problem if not addressed, and addressing it required the completed report, and the completed report was his job, and whatever had happened in the lounge was a different thing, and the right thing to do with different things was to keep them separate enough that each one got the attention it needed. He submitted the report at the end of his shift. He changed out of his uniform in the staff room. He ate a meal in the hub canteen that was satisfactory without being memorable and thought, while eating it, about nothing in particular. He was a person who had learned to do that, to think about nothing in particular after something particular had happened. It was not suppression exactly, more like composting. You let the experience settle into a layer, and over time it became part of the ground you stood on rather than a thing you were carrying. He thought about the secondary skin presentation, the wrong color, the confirmation of what his hands had already told him when he knelt down. He thought about the 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He thought about talking to someone who couldn't hear him. He thought about Preth's face. He thought about the ventilation irregularity in Corridor 7, and whether the repair crew would address it by next rotation or if he would need to follow up. He went home to his quarters. He had a video message from his brother in Guadalajara and he watched it twice and sent one back. He looked at the certification calendar on his wall. Cross-species module came up again in 6 weeks and confirmed the registration was in place. He had confirmed this before, but he liked confirming things. Oh, he slept. Ambassador Dranathi Voss requested to speak with him 3 days later. The request came through Hub administration with the formal notation of an official diplomatic communication, which meant it crossed 3 desks before it reached him and arrived with a slight bureaucratic patina on it that made it feel more official than it probably needed to be. Tamaz read it twice. He thought about it. He confirmed the meeting. The Hub's medical bay had a visitor reception room with slightly better furniture than the rest of the facility, the concession to dignity that medical spaces make when they know their patients receive guests. Ambassador Voss was in a chair rather than a bed, which the medical staff had apparently deemed appropriate for a formal meeting, and she was in Shenalari formal diplomatic dress rather than medical wear, which told him she had insisted on it. She looked, Tamaz thought, like someone who had been reminded of something she had not expected to need reminding of, and had been in the process of deciding how to sit with that reminder for 3 days. She was older than he had registered in the lounge. The crisis and the floor and the 4 minutes and 30 seconds had given him a specific narrow view of her, mostly the secondary skin presentation and the airway and the breathing, the diagnostic data. As a person in a chair, she was different, distinguished in the formal Shenalari way with the precise bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where bearing mattered, and something else that was underneath the bearing and harder to name. Preth was present, 2 steps behind and to the side, in the configuration of an aide attending an official engagement. He caught Tamaz's eye once and then returned to the careful professional attention of someone focusing on the meeting. Tamaz sat in the chair across from her. He had worn his uniform. He was, in every observable sense, the transit facility manager at Marath Hub, which was what he was, and he had decided that bringing anything else to this meeting was not his job. Ambassador Voss looked at him for a long moment. The Shenalari formal register, high, precise, slightly removed, was present in her face and her posture. So was the other thing. "Well, you saved my life," she said. "The medical team saved your life," Tamaz said. "I held the space until they got there. The lead medic informed me that what you did in the first 5 minutes was." "I know what she said," Tamaz said, not unkindly. "I heard what she said. I'm not arguing the point. I'm saying it was a team effort and I want to be accurate about who did what." Ambassador Voss was quiet for a moment. "You are a very precise person," she said. "It's the job," he said. "Transit management details matter." "Yes," she looked at her hands. "Preth told me about the cross-species certification, the additional training." "It's not uncommon for facilities like this one," Tamaz said. "He told me you take it every year." "I do." "For the hub population," she said, "for whoever's there." He recognized his own words. "That's right." She was quiet again. In the quiet, Tamaz noticed the quality of it, not the silence before a performance, not the silence of someone gathering themselves for a statement, just quiet. A person being in a place after something had happened. I was saying something, she said. When the event occurred, I was speaking to my aides. You don't have to. I am aware that I don't have to, she said. Something in the formal register shifted, not much, enough. I am choosing to. He waited. I was saying something about the Terran species that was, she paused. That was consistent with views I have held and expressed for some time about cognitive architecture, about the pace of development, she stopped again. The phrase I used was well-trained animal. I had not completed the sentence when I lost consciousness. Tamaz looked at her steadily. Okay. You were in the lounge. Oh, yes. Oh, you heard it. The pause, some of it. And yet, she said. And yet, he agreed. She looked at him with the full direct gaze that Shen-Aleri used when they were not performing directness, but actually being direct, which was different and visible once you knew what to look for. I want to understand, she said, not as a political matter, not as a diplomatic protocol. I want to understand how a being does what you did for someone who was saying what I was saying. She held his gaze. In my experience, beings act for those they see as equivalent or above. We help those we consider worth helping. That's one way to do it, Tamaz said. Is there another? He thought about the honest answer. Not the diplomatic one, not the one that performed a value rather than holding it. I don't actually think about whether someone is worth helping, he said. When someone needs help, that question doesn't come up. She waited. I was sitting in a lounge, he said. You fell. There was a thing I could do to help. I did it. The thinking about it comes after, not during. During it's just the sequence. The see of what needs to happen next. But the thinking comes after, she said. And what does the thinking say? He sat with this for a moment, the honest answer. The thinking says she needed help, he said. The thinking says the help was there to give. The thinking says that whether she would have helped me in the same situation is a separate question from whether she needed help and I could provide it. He looked at her steadily. Those two questions are related in some frameworks. In mine, they're separate. Ambassador Voss was very still. Preth, 2 steps behind her, was looking at the window in the careful way of someone paying attention to something they were pretending not to pay attention to. In your framework, she said slowly, need and worthiness are separate categories. Need is the only category that matters in the moment, Tamaz said. Worthiness is something else. Maybe it matters somewhere, not in the 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he wondered if the meeting was over and she simply hadn't indicated it yet. I have a question, she said. It is not a diplomatic question. I would like an honest answer rather than a politic one. Okay. What were you thinking, she said, while you were on the floor beside me? What was in your mind? He thought about it, the actual answer. Secondary skin presentation, he said. Airway, breathing rate, the protocol sequence. Whether the aid was going to be fast enough on the comm, whether I was reading the secondary skin correctly or if I was misidentifying that one I had about half a second on where I was genuinely uncertain. He paused. And I was talking to you, telling you the medical team was coming and you were going to be fine. I know you couldn't hear me, I did it anyway. Why? Well, he thought about it. Because if I'd been the one on the floor, he said, I'd want someone talking to me, even if I couldn't hear them, even if the voice wasn't, he stopped. Because the alternative is silence and silence is worse. She looked at him for a long moment and said nothing. That's all, he said, that's the whole list. He left the meeting after another half-hour of conversation that was, on her end, the careful deconstruction of an assumption she had held for a long time, and on his end, the honest answering of questions from someone genuinely trying to understand something they'd gotten wrong. He did not make it easy for her. He was not unkind. But he did not perform the graciousness that would have given her an easier path to absolution, because that was not what was being asked for, and it would have been, in the precise sense of the word, inaccurate. He walked back through the hub. The morning rotation was beginning to pick up, ships docking and departing, the transit lounge filling and clearing in the rhythmic way of a facility that never truly stopped. He walked past the spot where she had fallen. Someone had cleaned the floor, which was expected. The lounge had no memory of it, which was also expected. Transit spaces did not hold the events that happened in them. All he did. He went to his office and found 3 messages waiting and a follow-up query about the Corridor 7 ventilation work and a scheduling conflict in the Platform 4 maintenance rotation. He addressed them in order of operational urgency, which was the correct order. At approximately the 4th hour of his shift, Preth appeared at his office door. Tamaz looked up. "Is she all right?" "She is well," Preth said. "Recovering. She asked me to. She wanted me to speak with you." He came into the office and stopped a correct professional distance from the desk, which was not quite the distance of a formal diplomatic aide and not quite the distance of a person visiting. Somewhere between. "I owe you an apology." "Oh, you?" "I was present," Preth said. "For everything she said in the lounge, I did not correct her. I am her aide, and I have not in 3 years corrected her when her views on certain species were expressed in that way." He held Tamaz's gaze. "This is not the first time she has spoken about Terrans in those terms in my presence. It is the first time I understood clearly what those terms meant." Tamaz looked at him. "What changed?" "You were 4 seats away," Preth said. "And she was, and you," he stopped, collected himself in the Chenalari way, the small reconfiguration that amounted to a breath. "I watched you move. Before I had understood what was happening, you were already there, and he looked at the window. I was afraid to touch her, not because I did not care, because I did not know what to do, and the not knowing made me still. You were not still." "You did exactly what I asked you to do," Tamaz said. "The communication, the medical history, that mattered." "You told me what to do," Preth said. "You directed me, while you were also assessing her and talking to her, and," he looked back at two. "Moss, how do you do that? Multiple things at once in a crisis." "Training," Tamaz said. "Time. The first time I had to use the certification, I was barely functional. The training is so you can do the sequence without the thinking getting in the way." You have done this before." Twice before this. "And each time you take the recertification." "Each time I take the recertification," Tamaz said. "And each time I find out what I didn't know last time." Preth was quiet for a moment. Then, "I am going to take the training." Tamaz looked at him. "The cross-species first aid certification," Preth said. "The full curriculum. I travel with the ambassador and I have been in this work for 3 years and I have no capacity to act in the way that you acted." He met Tamaz's eyes. "I would like to know what I am looking at when I get there." Tamaz heard his own words again. He sat with them for a moment. "The module runs about 4 days for the full cross-species version," he said. "Marath Hub runs it quarterly. Next one is in 6 weeks." "I will register," Preth said. "I'll send you the contact for the certification authority," Tamaz said. "They can arrange it through the diplomatic schedule." "Thank you," Preth paused at the door, then he turned back. She is not a person who says certain things easily. She said to tell you," she said. He seemed to be deciding whether to deliver the exact words or a version of them. She said, "Tell him what I was saying when I fell is not what I think now." She said to say it exactly. He met Tamaz's eyes. "I am saying it exactly." Tamaz nodded. "Tell her," he said, "that I know." Preth inclined his head in the Chenalari formal acknowledgement and went. Tamaz sat in his office for a while after Preth left. He looked at the certification calendar. 6 weeks to the next cross-species module. He made a note to confirm the registration again, which he had already confirmed, because he liked confirming things and because it was the kind of task that was satisfying in the specific way of something that was small and correct and entirely in your control. He thought about what she had said. Tell him what I was saying when I fell is not what I think now, the weight of it. Not delivered to him directly, which would have been easier for both of them, but sent through Preth with the instruction to say it exactly, which was not easy and was therefore, he thought, more honest than the direct version might have been. He thought about the 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He thought about talking to someone who couldn't hear him and why he had done it and whether the reason he'd given her, because silence is worse, was the whole reason or just the part of it that was easy to say. He pulled out his certification file and looked at the cross-species module curriculum. He had taken it 9 times. He knew most of it extremely well. But each time through it, he found something he had noted the previous year and understood differently now, a context that had shifted, a case study that meant something new after more time, a protocol step whose logic he finally fully grasped. This year he would understand the secondary skin assessment differently. He already knew that, sitting in his office 4 days after the event. He would read the curriculum note about Shenalari cardiac indicators and it would not be a clinical notation anymore. It would have her face attached to it. The wrong color of the skin, the confirmation, the moment of uncertainty where he wasn't sure he was reading it right. He would read it and he would know it in the way you know things that have happened to you, rather than things you have been taught. He made a note in the file. That was how the curriculum worked for him. He added to it each year from what had happened, from what the training had met. It was a record not of what he had learned in classrooms, but of what the classrooms had prepared him for, which turned out to be a different document. His comm chimed. Platform 4 maintenance scheduling conflict needed a resolution. He addressed it. He thought about Preth saying, I would like to know what I am looking at when I get there. He thought about a young Shenalari aide who had stood 2 steps behind the wrong certainty for 3 years and had watched it fall, and was now going to spend 4 days learning what to do so that the next time he was not still. He thought about the ventilation irregularity in Corridor 7, now properly reported, which would be addressed by the repair crew on next rotation. He thought about his brother's video message and the one he had sent back. He thought about nothing in particular in the productive way. 2 weeks later, a package came through Hub administration for him. Official diplomatic notation, Shenalari continuance seal, flagged as personal correspondence. Inside was a small thing, a Shenalari memory vessel, the hand-sized kind carved from pale gray stone use. In their culture to hold what they called Vethimar, the formal acknowledgement of a debt that cannot be fully repaid but must be named anyway. The stone was old. It had the worn smoothness of something that had been held many times. There was no letter. There was a notation in formal Shenalari script that Tamaz took to the Hub's translation desk, because he did not read Shenalari formally and he wanted to know exactly what it said. The translation desk came back with, for the one who was talking when I could not hear it, I heard it afterward. He sat with that for a while. He turned the vessel over in his hands, the worn smoothness, something held many times by other hands before his. A thing with history in it that was now in his hands, in his office, in the hub at the edge of the Teshan shipping corridor where ships came through all day from 60 member species, and the maintenance reports waited, and the certification calendar marked 6 weeks to the next module. He put the vessel on his desk, next to the certification calendar. He looked at the 2 things beside each other. Then he went back to work, because there was work to do and he was the person whose job it was to do it, and the doing of it was how he understood, in the clearest language available to him, what he thought the world should be. The cross-species module ran its next session 6 weeks later, as scheduled. Tamaz taught a portion of it, the Shenalari cardiovascular unit, which he had been asked to contribute to 3 years ago based on practical experience, and which he updated each time with new case notes. This year he added a case. He described it clinically as case studies were described. The presenting condition, the assessment sequence, the secondary skin presentation, the 4-minute 30-second timeline, the protocol deployed, the outcome. He did not include the context of the lounge or the conversation in the 20 minutes before or the things that had happened in the 2 weeks after. The case study was about the medicine. The context was something else. A Preth was in the room. Tamaz saw him in the third row, in the mixed group of transit workers and diplomatic staff and medical aides who came through the certification program. Preth was listening with the focused, thorough attention of someone who was going to know this material because it mattered and who had already decided that before the session started. He caught Tamaz's eye once, briefly, then returned his attention to the curriculum. Tamaz continued the case study. The room was quiet in the particular way of people learning something they understood from the inside, was not theoretical. When the session was over and the participants were filing out, Preth stopped at the front of the room. The case, he said, in the study. Oh yes, Tamaz said. You used it to teach. It was useful, Tamaz said. Cases are how you learn what the training is for. Preth looked at him, something in his face that was the complicated thing Tamaz had seen in the medical bay 3 weeks ago, now with something resolved in it. She is speaking at the Conclave Integration Committee next month, Preth said, on the topic of Terran integration policy. Tamaz looked at him. I do not know what she will say, Preth said carefully. I have been her aide for 3 years and I am not certain I can predict it anymore. He paused. I think that is the first time I have been uncertain about it. I find I prefer the uncertainty to the certainty I had before. What were you certain about before? Tamaz asked. Preth was quiet for a moment. That she was right, he said, in the way that people are right when they are very confident for a long time. I had heard the arguments so often they had become the ground I stood on rather than something I was choosing to believe. And now? Now I am choosing, Preth said. That is different, it is less comfortable. He met Tamaz's eyes. I think less comfortable is correct. Tamaz thought about the certification calendar, the confirmation he made every year, the case file he added to every year with what had happened since the last time. A less comfortable usually means you're paying attention, he said. Preth inclined his head, not the formal diplomatic acknowledgement, something more personal than that without a name for it in the protocols. He left. Tamaz packed up the curriculum materials. He updated the case file, new session, new notes, Preth's presence, the description of the room's particular quiet. He would read it next year and understand something in it differently. He picked up the memory vessel from where he'd set it while teaching, the worn stone. He thought about her saying, I heard it afterward. He thought about talking to someone who couldn't hear him, and the reason he'd given, because silence is worse, and the part he hadn't said, which was that you talk to people who can't hear you because the alternative is to decide that hearing requires something in return, and once you've made that decision, you've already decided something about who is worth the words. He believed everyone was worth the words. He didn't know when he had learned this. He thought it might have been gradual, the way the curriculum built year on year, each case adding something to the ground he stood on, until the ground was made of what he had seen and what he had done and what had happened when he got there with the training, and you couldn't separate the belief from the accumulated weight of all those instances. He put the vessel in his bag. He went back to work. The Corridor 7 ventilation irregularity had been addressed, the repair held, the certification was confirmed, the Platform 4 scheduling conflict had resolved. Small things correctly done. The ground kept building. If you've been here for this whole story, all the way to the ground that builds, then you already know that this isn't really about who's primitive and who isn't. It's about someone who decided a long time ago in a first aid classroom to learn what they're looking at when they get there. For whoever's there, that's it. That's the whole of it. If that landed somewhere in your chest that you want to come back to, subscribe. We make one of these every week for exactly the kind of person who stays until the last sentence. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.